Welcome to the inaugural podcast for Scorpions for StarCitizen.com. I am your host, SK Unimatrix, or SCU, as my moniker on the RSI forum is, and I am talking to you today from a very wet and soggy, unincorporated St. Louis County. This week we'll be discussing joysticks on a budget, basically those available under $50. And additionally, we'll discuss what is the Scorpions for Star Citizen community, and also kind of talk a little bit about myself, which I guess I should start there with an introduction. I am SK Unimatrix, or SCU. Previously, I'd gone by the username, avatar name, whatever you want to call, Unimatrix from a game called Star Kingdoms. Played that for about 10 years. It was a tick-based browser strategy game. Really, it was more of a political game than really pure strategy, to be honest. But I played the game on and off for about 10 years. Know a lot of people from there. And it was a lot of fun. And in fact, the game still exists. You can still sign up from Create a Kingdom and Star Kingdoms today and keep playing. I've not really been playing actively over the past couple of years, just because didn't have time. I personally got out of PC gaming about a decade ago. It was when I built my last PC gaming rig. And that's because the major publishers stopped making the games on the PC I wanted to play. And I shifted to Macintosh for my desktop, laptop needs, since I've spent basically the past 10 years in Unix systems administration, systems integration, as well as some software development. So the Macintosh delivered me a Unix-based environment to do development and testing and all that fun stuff with Microsoft Office. So it kind of met the best of all worlds. And that department, it was rather light in the gaming arena, but I wanted to a Xbox for my gaming needs. So that's where I've basically been the past 5 to 10 years as far as gaming is concerned. And I say the PC manufacturer, or I should say the publishers, quit making PC games I wanted to play because I grew up playing flight sims, flight combat sims, and space combat sims. My very first game ever was Microsoft Flight Simulator 1.0. In fact, I still own that game on 5.25-inch floppy disk with the manual. Then went on to F-19 and some of the great microprose titles, Gunship 2000. I believe there's a couple A-10 games in there, Red Baron from Sierra Diamond X back in the day. And then moved on to the Wing Commander series of games and the X-Wing series, Free Space. In fact, my favorite game of all time happens to be Wing Commander Privateer, hence why when Chris Roberts kind of announced Star Citizen, I was one of those people, shut up, take my money. And that's because 20 years ago when Privateer was released, in fact, I still have the game in a box on 3.5-inch floppy disks. I've bought the game 3 times now. I bought it originally on floppy disks. I bought it again on CD-ROM for like $10 with Righteous Fire and in the speech pack. That was a big deal back in the day. It had speech. And then recently repurchased it again from Good Old Games for Macintosh. I wanted to play this game 20 years ago. I thought it would be cool if you could fly around and all these NPCs you would encounter would actually be real people. Or I can invite my friend to dial in via a 1200 or 2400 baud modem. Yeah, baud modems, if you remember or know what those are. You're old. Anyway, you could dial in and man my turret. Well, whenever Chris Roberts announced Wing Commander or Star Citizen, I was thinking, wow, this is Privateer. The Privateer game that I had imagined 20 years ago and wanted to play, so shut up, take my money. It's the first PC game in a decade that I've honestly wanted to play, and has got me looking at buying a new computer gaming rig, although that'll probably occur next year, because I have a 3-year-old desktop. I've upgraded it to run Star Citizen at least on a low or medium detail setting, and I figure that should be sufficient enough, because plans in this household would have been to buy a new desktop next year anyway. And if you hear things shaking, that's just the dog. He has one of those nice little collars on, so he'll stop chewing his paw right now. So I apologize for that. But anyway, that's a little bit about me. Scorpions for Star Citizen started as a group of us, I guess you could call us Battlestar Galactica Online refugees. We're groups of players who, some of us started during open beta, and then have left the game over periods of time because of gross mismanagement by the game developer. I mean, they're on their 5th development team, I think, in 2 years. And And what started out to be a highly promising game just turned into a total suckfest, both from a player experience as well as a community experience. However, many of us started leaving the game upwards of 18 months ago now, and when we started to go to other games, those of us who were once bitter opposed rivals started playing together. Like a group of us left to go play Star Trek Online, and we started forming up fleets together, even though we had been bitter rivals before, working together in that game. Others have gone on to Star Wars The Old Republic, PlanetSide 2, World of Tanks, War Thunder, a bunch of other games. But we've kind of maintained, I guess you could say, loose associations, ties. But then Star Citizen was announced, and immediately this caught a lot of our attention, because primarily this group, although it doesn't always necessarily behave like it, vast majority of the players are between the ages of 30 and 50. When Chris Roberts announced Star Citizen, much like me personally, we took a look at it and said, "Wow, this is the game we've been wanting to play for years. We haven't had a good space combat simulator for years." And about a year ago, the Diaspora team released Diaspora, and a bunch of us ran out, bought joysticks, and dusted off our rudder pedals and HOTAS systems, and started playing space combat simulators again, and having a blast doing so. So while we originally started from Scorpia, the BSG Scorpia server, that's greatly expanded now as we've become a general BSGO refugee group with players from Caprica, Sagittarion, Aquaria, Lebron, Tauron. I'm sure I'm missing a half a dozen other colonies and servers, but still, throughout the BSGO community who's going to be playing Star Citizen. So, as such, we kind of have banded together as a loose association at this point. There's going to be multiple corporations, myself and a lot of the I guess you could say co-founders and prime drivers and motivators from the old Interwing Alliance on Scorpia. We've started up a corporation called ULMC. I think there's another group that started another corporation called Omega Corp, if that name isn't already taken. And I'm sure there's going to be 2 or 3 more corporations formed up before Persistent Universe goes live next year. So that's a little bit about us as a gaming group, a little bit about myself. So with that, we're going to get into our first regular segment, which is going to be called Known Knowns. And for the segue and introduction, I bring you Donald Rumsfeld.
There are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
This quote comes from a press conference when Donald Rumsfeld was SecDef a few years ago, and it was one where his response met with a lot of criticism and joking about how he answered the question, but I find the soundbite to be incredibly appropriate to where we are in Star Citizen right now, because we do have our known knowns. Those are things that Chris Roberts has said publicly or has announced through the forum's official transcripts or interviews. We have a lot of known unknowns. These are a lot of issues and things brought up by the community, especially people who have played other games. Let's say like Cough Cough Battlestar Galactica Online and saw how everything went wrong there. I think MechWarrior Online is another example of this. And then we have our unknown unknowns, which I kind of state as wild and rampant speculation by the player fan base community, oftentimes spread through the RSI forums. So whenever we go through this segment, we're going to be dissecting criteria based on those 3 areas, or listing information based on those 3 areas. What are the known knowns, what are the known unknowns, and what are just unknown unknowns. Actually, we probably won't be addressing unknown unknowns that much, to be honest with you. Now, I think that we need to define what a space flight combat simulator is, because this is a genre of game that has essentially been dead outside of enthusiast circles or niche market for about a decade, if not more. And I say that because Microsoft stopped producing the Sidewinder joysticks in 2003, citing lack of sales. So that's kind of when I determined that the end of this genre really was, as far as mass market gaming is concerned. In a space or flight combat simulator game, there's no third-person view. You are in a first-person cockpit view. You have an instrument panel, you have radars, you have sensors, and you have to use these sensors. Now, there are a variety of tools that elite pilots playing these games will use, such as track IR to do head movements, along with at least a dual, if not a tri-monitor setup, in order to really gain a significant advantage. Believe it or not, there does become an advantage depending on what peripherals you are using. If you want to be an elite combat dogfighter pilot in this game, I would recommend that you budget $1,000 for peripherals. If you don't already own what you're going to need. Those are going to be things like possibly Oculus Rift, if not at the very least Track IR or Tracker, or some other sort of head tracking capabilities, a multi-monitor setup, and a HOTAS flight controller. And let's start in by talking about flight controllers, because this is the second most question after graphics cards that I get within the Scorpions for Star Citizen community or the website. Joysticks were a staple of PC gaming throughout the 80s and 90s. If you were playing a PC game or a computer game in those days, most likely you were using a joystick for input. Now, that was also because a majority of the games, at least the ones that I saw and were playing, were oftentimes military flight simulators or space combat games. Those were the first-person shooters and MMOs of their day, in terms of popularity, certainly not in styles of gameplay. Well, gone are the days when you could walk into a Circuit City, I mean, there are no more Circuit Cities, or a Best Buy, and see 20 joysticks from half a dozen or more manufacturers, ranging in price from $10 to several $100s. You're basically left with 4 manufacturers today. You have Logitech, who only has one entry into the market, Thrustmaster, who has a few options, ranging from $20 all the way up to $500. Then you have, SATEC, Mad Catz bought SATEC 2009, and CH Products. Those are your 4 manufacturers of joysticks left, and each week we're going to be discussing each one of those manufacturers at different price points. This week we're going to discuss really controllers and joysticks, because a lot of people are going out to buy their first joysticks because they've never had to before, because again, the genre of flight combat simulators, whether they're in space or atmospheric, have been dead for 10 years outside of X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator, which are really geared toward the civil aviation crowd, not necessarily the flight combat crowd. So when you're looking at a joystick, there's essentially a couple things to consider. Many joysticks these days come with essentially 4 axes. They have X and Y, which is your left, right, up, and down. They usually also have a Z-axis, which is your throttle. And then many have what are called XY axes or twist. And that's used most often to simulate rudder pedals. So you can twist the joystick left or right and yaw, essentially. So you have your pitch, roll, yaw, and thrust. Basically your 4 directions or your 4 elements that make up flight. Then you'll have a number of buttons like triggers, thumb buttons, hat switches, which allow you to have like up to 8 ways of selecting, usually used to change cockpit views if you don't have a tracker. And then some buttons on the side, typically. And then you have another class of control inputs called HOTAS, which is an acronym standing for hands-on throttle and stick. These are kind of the creme de la creme when it comes to fighter combat games. Those who are into it more than just a hobbyist are going to be wanting to have a HOTAS setup. Now, HOTAS comes out of development of the real-life F-16 program, where the Air Force decided that, you know what, a pilot should be able to manipulate any core critical function from either the throttle or the stick without having to touch any other dials or buttons on the panel, on the cockpit, so that, you know, he's not stuck having to take his hand off the throttle at a critical point in a dogfight to hit a button, and then he gets killed because of that split second. And what I found is, eerily enough, when it comes to playing these games, there's a hierarchy of controller. And those who have HOTAS setups, have them configured, have the muscle memory, and know what they're doing, will oftentimes use that split-second advantage to their favor against somebody who's saying just has a joystick and a keyboard. So, the next question I get is, what about console controllers for PC, whether it's a generic PlayStation style controller or the Xbox 360 for Windows controller. Because you do see Chris Roberts demo the game at these conferences and exhibition shows with an Xbox 360 for Windows controller. That's absolutely true. But if you ever look at pictures of his desk setup, it's usually his laptop with an X52 Pro HOTAS setup. So, I address this way. I think a lot of it depends on what you're going to be doing in-game and what ships you're going to be flying. If you're going to be flying purely dogfighting ships, that means Auroras to a certain degree. I should really classify this as any real single or dual-seat spacecraft, whether it's an Avenger, a 300X, an Aurora, a Mustang, a P-52 Merlin, Gladiator, or Cutlass. I think a HOTAS setup is going to be the ultimate dogfighting setup. Did I say Hornet? I don't know if I did or not. But anyway, any of those single or double seat fighters, you're going to want to have at least a joystick, preferably a HOTAS system. Now, if you're looking at making your money more from cargo than you are from fighting, and let's say you're flying a Freelancer or a Connie or a Starfarer or an Icarus, maybe even a Caterpillar, or a Retaliator, I think you're going to be able to get away with a gamepad. And I also think that a gamepad or a console-like controller for computer is probably going to be the best jack of all trades, meaning I think it's going to be equally as good to fly a larger ship as it is to man a turret, as it is to do first-person shooter actions on planets or boarding actions. At the same time, it'll probably be the master of none. And then if you're going to be doing a lot of manning of a console station, perhaps even turret gunning or first-person shooting on planets or boarding actions, a keyboard and mouse is going to probably be your best setup there, as you would set up for Battlefield 4 or Call of Duty or any of those games on the PC. So let's say that you're going to be a single-seat combat fighter jock, as I'm planning and many others are planning to do so, as long as our 30-year-old reflexes allow us, our 30 and 40-year-old reflexes allow us to. For that, you're going to be wanting a joystick at the very least, preferably a HOTAS. So a lot of people are looking at buying their first joystick, and a lot of people are not wanting to spend hundreds of dollars on a premier HOTAS type setup. So what are your options? Well, the good news is you have a lot of very good options at under $50, including one HOTAS setup. Now, the manufacturer base for joysticks has diminished considerably. There are 4 manufacturers left. There's Logitech with a single entry into the market. Thrustmaster, who's been around for a number of years, produces quality products. CH Products produce a little bit more expensive. We're not going to be discussing any of their products today because all of them are over $50. And then you have Mad Catz, which bought the Saytech brand around 2009, 2010. So those are your 4 manufacturers of game controllers, of joysticks at least. So at the very bottom tier, you have the Thrustmaster USB joystick. It is a very simple, basic joystick with a throttle, 6 buttons. It's $20. It will do the job. I don't necessarily think it's really the best for the money, because simply saying, for $5 to $10 more, you can buy either a Logitech Extreme 3D Pro or the Thrustmaster T-Flight X, and have a much more capable joystick that I think they're really going to enjoy more. But I will mention that if you're on an absolute budget, this is the joystick for you at $20. You can purchase it through, I believe, Walmart.com and have free shipping to store, as well as Amazon.com, Newegg, and I believe Tiger Direct as well. Next item we're going to be discussing is one that I can talk personally about because it's the joystick that I currently own and fly with. It is the Logitech Extreme 3D Pro. Now, I bought this joystick last year. Previously, I'd owned an X45 set from Saytech that I bought around 99, 2000. It had lasted me until 2009, in which the house I was living in at the time got destroyed due to high 100-mile-an-hour winds and several trees falling on it. At that time, I elected not to replace it because that's when my oldest gaming PC got trashed, and I just wasn't playing very many games at that time. I was in the middle of running a company getting ready to sell it. So, at any rate, this time last year, or back last September of 2012, Diaspora was released. and it's based on the Free Space 2 engine. It's a Battlestar Galactica style game, or set in that universe. And I went, cool. Myself and a bunch of other people instantly ran out to buy joysticks and went to Best Buy, and the only thing on the shelf was this Logitech Extreme 3D Pro. Now, I was kind of hesitant to buy it at $35. You can also find it online for as low as $25, with an average price of around $30 if you purchase it online. It's going to cost you $35 if you buy it out of a store. Probably going to cost you about that same amount of money if you include shipping, unless you happen to have a free shipping deal or something like that, or buying it in conjunction with other peripherals or goods or whatnot. So if you're like buying a book and also buy this joystick, probably going to get free shipping from Amazon. At any rate, I was hesitant to buy this joystick because I had a really bad experience with Wingman joysticks by Logitech in the mid-90s. I went through 3 in 1 year, and this is before the days where I could have a real job, so it basically ate up all my birthday, good grades, allowance, and mowing people's yards money for a good year. And I think I spent around $120, $130, which was a lot of money to me back in those days. So it left me with a bad taste in my mouth. But it was the only joystick available, so I decided I'd take a chance, purchased it, brought it home, and I've been using it for a year ever since, playing Diaspora as well as War Thunder. And I have to say, I'm actually very, very pleased with the joystick. I'm not going to ever say it's the best joystick I ever owned. That still goes to a Gravis Blackhawk Digital that I owned back in the day. But it is a very solid, reliable joystick for $30. If you're going to buy a joystick, especially off the shelf, this one will do fine. I highly recommend it. And in fact, I found a Logitech Attack 3 that I bought at some point, I have no idea why, in a box somewhere. So I'm going to hook those up, and I'm going to try to do a dual joystick setup when we initially get the dogfighting module, and just see how that works for me. Personally, I'm predicting that I'm just not going to be able to get the hang of it, and I'm going to want to go to a HOTAS type setup eventually. But initially, that's what I'm going to try to do with the 2 joysticks. We'll see how that works. I'll give you a report back when dogfighting module is released, and I've had some in-cockpit time to kind of figure out some of that stuff. Which leads us to our next joystick, which is roughly an equivalent by Thrustmaster called the T-Flight X. This is the stick component of what their HOTAS setup is. That being said, this joystick's also about $30. It does have one significant difference from the Logitech. The Thrustmaster T-Flight X is PlayStation 3 as well as PC compatible. So you can use it either with your console or the PC by flipping a switch on the device. So if you have a PlayStation 3, maybe you might get a flight type game or something for that. It may be a consideration as an alternative. As far as functionality goes, both joysticks offer 12 buttons and a throttle. There's not a whole lot of difference in that regard. And the reports back from people who have the joystick say they like it well enough. So, if you absolutely are against the Logitech name for whatever reason, you can also consider the Thrustmaster T-Flight X. I don't really think there's much difference between the 2 joysticks. To be completely honest with you, if the T-Flight X had been on the shelf at Best Buy a year ago, I probably would have ended up with that joystick over the one that I currently have. Which now brings us to our next tier of joystick, which qualifies under the $50 price mark if and only if you buy from Walmart.com. If you go to any other site, this joystick's going to be listed at about $60, say between $55 and $60. And that is the Thrustmaster T16000M. This is the best pure joystick for the money. I will, in later episodes or podcasts, make the argument that probably their CH Fighter Stick is the best overall joystick, but this one is certainly the best joystick for the money, and for several reasons behind that. That is first, it's ambidextrous. The Logitechs and the Thrustmasters that I've previously described are all for right-handed only. Well, apparently you can remove some of the parts and put on left-handed parts, and now the joystick can be used for left-handed or left-handers, especially handy, especially if you've been a civil aviation pilot and you're used to yoke in the left hand, throttle in the right. So that's one of those things that is a good selling point, but the big selling point is the fact that it features magnetic centering. This magnetic centering is also very accurate. They're claiming 16,000 by 16,000 DPI equivalent if you're used to saying what gaming mice have as far as their DPI. What makes magnetic centering very interesting is the last joysticks that I know that had it was the very last generation of Microsoft Sidewinder Precision Pro 2, I think it was, or Sidewinder 2 Pro. This joystick, or this technology, should mean that the joystick never goes out of centering, which is a problem with these cheaper joysticks that I've been talking about. Normally they have a tension spring. Eventually that tension spring is going to get loose. Now some feature the ability to tighten it with a screw or something like that, or alternatively you have to increase the dead zone, which increases slop, meaning it's not as accurate or will respond to minute commands as well. And when I say that a joystick gets out of alignment, it's like the alignment with your car, where if you let go of the joystick, you'll be drifting to the left or the right, much the same way if you let go of the steering wheel and your car's out of alignment, you'll drift to the left or the right. Typically, you could readjust it for a while, but once it starts going out of detents or going out of alignment, ultimately you're going to be purchasing a new joystick within a few months at the most. A few weeks to a few months, you're buying a new joystick. So that's something that the T16000M has over any other joystick under $50, is that magnetic centering. It also features a throttle and 16 buttons which are mirrored on either side. So again, for left-handed or right-handers, I think that's an excellent setup, and it may make an excellent second stick if you're going to be doing a dual joystick setup, or two sticks if you wish to prefer to go that route. If you're going to be buying a joystick and you can afford to spend about $50, this would be the joystick to buy in my book. Reviews of it are generally very, very high, very favorable. Again, if I was going to buy a brand new joystick, just a joystick, after having done actual research and not being in a rush just to have a joystick, any joystick will do with a hat switch, this would be the joystick that I would be purchasing. Finally, we have the T-Flight X Hotess. This is a $50 setup from Thrustmaster, and like the T-Flight X joystick, it is also PlayStation 3 as well as PC compatible. Now, oftentimes you'll see the unit marketed as one combined both joystick and throttle in kind of one solid base, but you remove a screw and there's enough cable there that you can separate these two into two separate units, so you can have one on the left, one on the right. There are reports that when you separate them, there's not quite enough weight or mass at the bottom to keep them solidly in place. However, if you go to the hardware store or Walmart and buy some self-stick adhesive, either felt pads like you would put on a table or chair for hardwood floors, or rubber type pads, that'll create enough friction on most surfaces to keep them in place. So a nice $2 option to offset that little problem. Now, this is not the most sophisticated HOTAS system I have ever seen. It does feature paddles on the throttle that you can use to mimic rudder instead of twist. It also, I believe, features 4 or 5 buttons on the throttle, and then I believe 6 on the stick itself. I think you end up with a total, they advertise, of 15 or 16 buttons compared to just 12 on the joystick. And then you have the more finely tuned control of the throttle. All reports are people are very happy with this HOTAS setup at the price point. I know a number of people that I will be flying with within ULMC that are using this setup, and they're perfectly happy with it for the $50 that they spent. Now, the setup may be advertised more than $50. Again, it's through Walmart.com that it's the same price as the T16000M at last check. So those are basically your joystick choices if you're on a budget under $50. I hope that I haven't been droning on too long here. It looks like we're going to reach about the 30-minute mark here, which is where I wanted to be. So I want to thank you all for listening. Next week, we're actually going to talk more about Star Citizen itself and the community. I think the topic at this point is going to largely be, really, are we looking at EVE 2.0 or Care Bears in space? I have my opinions on which we're going to see when it comes to the persistent universe. We're also going to discuss CH lineups of products for joysticks and throttles and rudder pedals. They have a few unique things out there with the way that their joysticks operate in comparison to others. Also, they're the only people who produce a throttle that you can buy separately and then pair with any other joystick of your choice, which may be the route that I end up eventually going, because I know a lot of people who like the 2 joysticks for 6 degree of freedom of movement games. Again, I don't know if Star Citizen is going to support that, if it's going to be a hassle with a program like Joy2Key to support it, and C, I just don't know if I'm going to like it or not. As I said, I predict that I will probably go back to some sort of HOTAS type setup. So hopefully I've figured out comments and things like that. I will be posting this podcast to YouTube, as well as hopefully I'll probably do that first, and then later on into an enhanced podcast for iTunes. I've still got to figure out how to do that with the podcasting software on my website. Apparently it doesn't like M4A files for whatever reason. It won't play them with the online player, and there's some issues with the theme and being able to then link the feed to iTunes and RSS and all that cool and fun stuff. So I will try to get those figured out, but for now I'll be releasing this on YouTube, and thank you all for listening, and catch you next week.